let's go to our folder. So similarly, like how we have seen digital CV, similarly for the CSS, we'll do one exercise to understand exactly the benefits of CSS. So just to let's open yesterday's example. So you are able to build I mean using simple tools etc. You're able to practice, right? So
Yeah.
so primary thing in HTML all we see is what we learned is like we use some image tags. For that IMG is the tag, and for the anchor tag A is for meant for using hyperlinks, and for the GitHub etc. Text etc. What we are using is either for headings we use H1 to H6, or for the paragraph tags for representing the various text etc. And there are like some other elements are there, like if you want a table structure you can use a table control etc. And likewise, so for all the basic web development, W3 schools is the go-to place for finding the what are the tags, how we can use. See, it doesn't require very much deep understanding of anything, but all you need is if you refer to some similar to how UFA API we're talking about, it will not be so complex. Frameworks are like meant for providing simplify a lot of other tasks. So we'll understand how if we do some exercise in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, then only we'll understand the benefits of frameworks. So that is the whole point of how frameworks are differentiating from this basic building blocks. So these are all basic building blocks using which more complex frameworks are coming into picture into the for the web development space. So now if we can relate all these things to once again or Wikipedia, so see, just understand how beautifully you know Wikipedia is being organized. Okay, so the same basic, so they definitely might be using one or the other framework, but essentially all the elements which you see do not go out of this particular basic thing which we were talking about. So if you see over here, whatever we were discussing, so we had similar like how our digital CV was there. If you could organize it, and you could have provide some borders etc. and some um, more specific way as such with different ways. See, all the blue ones are like hyperlinks, so these are anchor tags, and specifically anything which you're seeing are like various uh, how you want to highlight it. So certain text etc. you can use different h tags, or you can use specific bold etc. So basic structure as such we had, but if you see the only missing element part here is you're seeing some borders out there, and you're seeing some layouts. If you see there's a layout here, so you have a layout here. So within HTML we have to, if you want to have 1, 2, 3 or lists we call, so order list or number list as such. So these lists also, these are part of HTML only. So it is just one control. So you use OL and for the number list etc. So those tags are straight away just how you're using paragraph tag, similar those tags. Similarly that's for the table etc. So now if you could just follow this basic things, all not necessary, only the couple of things which we frequently use we can touch upon. So similarly now today we'll just touch upon how CSS is used. Okay, right, let's go to, so so previous text, I'll take one similar one. I have basics, this will also do. So if you see here, let's take this snippet how it looks. So any web application we can inspect using our, if you right click and select inspect element, so you'll be able to, or control shift I. So it opens this, we call it as developer tools. So for any debugging, etc., we use this particular, you know, Chrome based, only Chrome based we'll use. So every browser has this particular developer tools, but Chrome tools are, much advanced. So if you see here, so same HTML, etc. Now you tend to see lots of style tags. See, there are like different ways of defining style tags. So when we say style, there's like the name itself signifies. So CSS allows us to provide some, different options of adding color to the text, or adding, some font to the text, and it's like even positioning as such. So if you wanted to place specific place, yesterday we have seen the image to place it. So different options, etc., to play around with, the look and feel factor. So for those aspects, etc., we'll generally go for CSS. So if you see here, the instead of plain, all the text previously we had were black, so there was no color to our text. So all were, you're using just a black, and then only for the hyperlinks we had the, with the blue. So now in this case, if you see the text tab, everything, it is got some font, and it has got some uh, color as such. So it's the same. So whatever we had, the same old HTML, but with some CSS. So how did we do this? Is there are like three ways of achieving this particular CSS. So one, we call it as something called inline CSS. So one is inline CSS. So inline CSS is what we used yesterday. So every tag, so within the paragraph or within the tag, if you straight away define a style tag. So now if in this case, this is our paragraph tag, and if we are defining a style tag, so always a brief understanding is it will have a property and a value, and all you have to do is define it this way. So if you want to define multiple properties, you can define, and how you have to separate is using semicolon. So semicolon, again, one more property. If you want to define, you can define property. So how many ever properties you want to define, you can define. So what is this property, what is this value? So in our case yesterday, if you see a similar image, we use something called background image, and similarly for color we used background color. So there are like, in this way CSS provides bunch of properties. So now if you want to just provide some color to it, all we'll do is we'll add background color, and we'll set as so we'll set the color to it. So like we have seen yesterday, like we can use different ways, so hex color, etc. So all are achieved using this particular style property. So style property is key for the browser to understand that this is the CSS style. Okay, so what is the other ways as such? We have something called the, so inline. This is, we'll call it as internal. Okay, inline itself. So we have internal. So internal is nothing but defining all the CSS properties at one place. So here what we are doing is we have lots of tags. So 1, 2, 3, like H1, H2, H4 we are having. So multiple places everywhere we are, our code is getting messed up. So you have lots of places if you are defining style tags. You cannot differentiate between HTML tags and CSS tags. So what they have come up is, why not we'll define all the style tags at one place, and let's refer those styles where are required. So what they have come up is, if you define on the header tag directly a style tag, just like how HTML tags are there, within this if you define all the your style properties, then that approach is internal. So what ideally we do is we use the help of class properties, selectors they call it as. So class property, or we have something called hash. If it starts with hash, it is called as ID property. If you want to apply for all the controls, then we have something called star. So star selector, these are selectors, they basically they called. Starting with dot is a class, is very popular one, which throughout UFA framework will be using it. Okay. So ID is very limited in use. You can very much use ID as well. Again, ID has the same problems of inline. So you have to remember all the IDs in this case. So you should know the ID in order to set the, you know um, set the CSS part. So knowing ID is important. So if you know, so what do mean by ID is, so uniquely to identify this particular element. So on the screen we have this particular heading. So in order to identify this heading, if you define, if you give one ID, specific unique ID. So this, suppose you say this is title. So ID title. If you say ID title, then we can always know that in order to set a color dynamically, we can set a color to this particular element. Similarly, if you wanted to, uh, what do you say, if you want to define only for a specific tag as such, like only for the header tag, always wherever h1 tag comes, always you wanted to use the same font, etc., then you can probably go for class based selectors. So that's how the whole concept. Now if you see in this case, what we have done is basically we have given, uh, if you see, this is how all the tags would are placed on the head section. So head section, like we said, this resume, what we have seen. So this is a head section. So this whole area is our body content. So the moment page is loading, all the style sheets are already loaded. So that's the reason why we place it on the top. We need to understand this point very much, because if you are using images, etc., as part of your CSS, because using CSS itself, we are loading the images. So if you put the style tag on the head section, first, unless your image, etc., loads, your page will not render, right? Because if you are putting on the header tag, so it is coming in this particular space. So all the images, etc., should be loaded. Then only the body content loads. Vice versa, if you place, you can as well place the style tag, after body as well. So if you're placing after body, first your content loads, then the image starts loading. So that means if image, etc., in this case will not load upfront, so it will load at the last. So these are different approaches which they follow for across script files or style tags, etc. Okay. So this is it doesn't make much difference in case of CSS, but in case of script files, it really makes. Now, if you see, yesterday we were just discussing about uh, our application, right? We had our application where so in this case we have seen the framework, etc., being defined in the head section itself. So because in the head section, first the framework should be loaded. If framework doesn't load, the controls, etc., which we are using it will not be rendered by the browser. So for that purpose, what we have done is in our index file, so we have defined in the head section. So in the head section itself, we are defining our style and script tags. So if you see, this is a head section where we have the style tags as well as the script tags, correct? So what we're trying to say is anything which we are saying as a head section is nothing but these resources are getting loaded first, and the performance improvement, etc., are all dependent on how bulky the framework is, how bulky the your images, etc., which you're using it, etc. So to optimize these things, there are various techniques as well. So how exactly we do also, we'll talk about in other sessions when we start with UFA framework. So idea is all your libraries, etc., should be loaded first. If they load first, then only your application can understand that these are the um, basic elements which are required for running this whole page and displaying the part. So clear? So we understood why we are using internal CSS and why we are placing it, in the head section as such. So inline, if you use, it will be messing up our code. So instead of that, we are using style tag. So let's. So in this case, all I have done is, body tag. So for the body tag completely, we could define some background color. So instead of image, we can define complete color. So if RGB or hex VS, in this case, we are using RGB from 0 to 255. And similar for H2 tag, whenever we see H2 tag. So I wanted to provide, color as white and text align center. And paragraph tag, we are using some font. So for aligning, so text also to provide at the center or at the left, right, etc. So this is a property. Similarly, we have font size one property to give the font how much 40 px, or you want to have a very huge font, etc. So etc. So color as green, yellow. So we have defined couple of CSS properties. So we can define this way as internal. And simultaneously, we can define inline also. The same properties, if you have to define inline, so this is how they'll appear. So style tag followed by font family. So multiple parameters how we are using is using a separator, and we are giving both font family as Verdana as well as we are using font weight as bold. So these are properties we'll find it in W3 for reference. So which all properties I can use, etc. Clear? And the same tags, yesterday what are tags we used, we just added the style tags in this case. So there is third approach for defining it. And see, what if you wanted to change the whole look and feel, you know, like in terms of themes we were talking, right? So as a flexibility as such. So for that we have something called external CSS. So external CSS, at most of the things which we use generally is external CSS. So for using external CSS, uh, just let me take you through example. So in this case, if you see, this looks straight away. So pretty much the same HTML, everything, right? So if you without any CSS, etc., this is how your page looks. So it is completely functional, but it doesn't have any look or feel, etc. Okay. So to add look and feel, etc. So CSS can be loaded, externally. So we can build all our application. Then we can add CSS as a, external element. So when we say external element, we can change the CSS part separately. So colors, etc. We can keep it completely independent of the application. So we don't define any inline or internal CSS in this case, and only the HTML part would be there, and CSS will be placed in a separate file, and we'll add CSS to it, and then it completely gets some color options, etc. So how do we do that is using the link tag. So if you use a link tag in this way head, so we all we define is same like anchor tag how we define. We have to define the CSS file location. So in this case, style.css. So is if any name you can give. It doesn't need to be style or anything. So in this case, it can be any name, but it should end with .css. So for HTML files, we'll say .html. For CSS files, we'll say .css, and for JavaScript files, we'll say .js. So that will clearly tell the browser runtime that okay, this file has to be taken care in such a way. Okay, so you're able to relate, right? Or
Yeah.
yeah. So what we are trying to say is now we are trying to load this particular CSS file, and then how exactly it looks we'll see. So in this case, we created one separate file, style.css, and all the tags we are trying to place in separate file. So in this case, our index file is separate and our style file is separate. So both files we are doing independently, and what we are trying to do is this CSS file we are trying to say that okay, refer to for all the styles, etc. Please refer to this external location. So we are placing this style sheet in some external location, and we are referring to that location so that our code looks clean. So if you see the same content here, it looks without any style tags. It plain looks like it has a simple head section, simple body section. That's it. So here we will concentrate only on our HTML tags. We'll not mess it up with CSS tags. Likewise, here we'll not mess it up with any tags. We'll just use CSS tags. So in this case, body, we wanted to add some color, header, uh, text, etc. The same tags which we used previously. Now we wanted to place it here. So all these are, mm, class based, and this is based on ID based. So hash, when we say it is based on ID based, and this is how we have different ways of defining the CSS. Let's see how this looks. All files will just run it with we can for these examples, the all you have to do is dot when you save with HTML, you can double click it, then it will open. So this was a basic thing. So this was external CSS. So the CSS property, what are everything are there, everything we are able to see this way. So in the head, we just define CSS tag. So the CSS tag, after loading the CSS tag, this is how it is appearing. If you see highlighted one, so in this case, so here we can figure out which tag we are referring to. So this tag we are referring to is paragraph tag. So highlighted one. So this particular external file in the body tag, the first and foremost tag which what we are using is paragraph tag. And if you relate to our CSS file as such, I'll put it on the extreme right, and then so just notice in this case. So the paragraph tag here, what are we wanted to have it. So this was there is no tag here, and neither was a tag here. So here we have p, but unless you prefix with dot or something, these changes will not be affected. So what I used is I used this is a class, so UI cursive, and if you put a star to anything, any particular property, so all paragraph types we can apply to this. So
Did you
suppose
say
in this,
star?
yes, a star. So if you
Okay.
use a star, so what exactly it does is, so it applies to all controls. So whatever controls are there, for all controls we can apply. If you use dot, it just applies to wherever we are using that particular name. So these are like basic direct tags. So if in this case p is a tag, okay, h2 is a tag, but you wanted to give some unique name. So the, always we'll not know, like, which tags we'll be using, etc., right? We wanted to have one name given to the CSS. So how we do is, like in this case, I can define star this way, and I can define some color, say color as red. Okay. So I will use some name. I have to use it somewhere. So what we'll do is, so in this case, I'll just use this class red color, whatever we have. I'll paste it at multiple places. Okay, let's see how it comes as such. I think it's getting overridden with existing CSS. Close everything. So I'm just having one file. Okay, me once. So there is a always every class, etc. Along with we have some reference as such. selectors. Let me revise if we are using the correct notation as such. So yeah, I think star can be used straight away. So every tag they are applying it. So we need not define any name. So direct star we can use it. Okay. So we are trying to give a name, right? So name is not required. So we can just say star and directly uh, it applies to whatever places we already use. Everywhere it applies. So this has some particular uses as such where whole font etc. we want to use same color. So in those cases it really helps. So in this case maybe for our use case we are already defined. So what it actually does is it is overwriting the previous which is defined for the first. So there it has a different order as such. So whenever we define, it can override the places which we have already defined CSS. So we have to be careful when we're using CSS that whether it is not having two different styles assigned to it. So in
And
this,
does it follow some type of an order? Like I say, if we put like the same thing above the, let's say the P class or something, and then put like green color, it's is it gonna show green color up all the way up to that bottom line where we put the red color?
yeah, good question. So what exactly happen is now it follows the instructions. So now if we set as red color for the first time, so it applies red color. So at the last, if there comes one more instruction saying that now set the tag as a different color, so it follows the last. So execution from will be from top to bottom. So from
Mm,
top to bottom, if we are changing the color at the bottom or place using some other approach, then it will override the color. Now in this case, style it, we have given in the style class as well. We have defined on the page as well. So it
mm,
takes precedence like based on the order of execution. Now on the head tag, style got already loaded.
mm.
Okay. This is at the afterwards when the body was executing. Once again, we defined one more,
Red.
class selectors as such.
Mm,
So there will be when you are using two different approaches. That's the reason we are trying to understand which will be loading first. So external
mm,
file which is defined in the head section will load first. So those instructions get instructed first. Then comes the body section. These instructions will be followed.
mm. Got it. So basically the order of execution.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you.
So CSS is, but we are not going to use all these approaches. We'll just use class approach. Okay. So this is just for what are the different ways we can deal with. So there could be different cases where we might face, different ways of dealing with this. Okay. So quickly let's understand how we use this thing. So for the body tag in this case, we specified as background color with purple color. So that's how we got the purple color here. And then for the H2 tag, wherever we are high H2 tag, we are setting as white. So in this case, bookmarks and learn CSS could be white, and we have set as text as align as center. So that's the reason if you see H2 tag, so there was a, it came to the center and it came with a white color. So we have defined H2 tag. So where H2 tag is there, so it has to be with white color and it has to align with center. So H2, if we have used anywhere, so we haven't used anywhere else. So only one H2 tag. So this has come. Along with side, we have used something called classes UI cursor. So when you say class, so here we used two different tags. So we used H2 tag, we have given one style. Alongside, we have given class also. So for class, what we have given, so we have given class as a font cursive and font size as 20px and color as white. So, so both the parameters are getting appended. So in the H2 we have defined center, so it came as center, and we have defined class as UI cursor. So font family it applied this particular font, and size also it made it as 20px. Let's say what happens if we change the color as such. Okay, so in this case I'll put some red color. Let's save. Let's see. So if you see in the head part we have in H2 we have defined as white, right? And but in the class we have defined a different color. So for the same property we have defined two colors. In this case we said white, and at the same time in the cursive we define color as different color. So if you say here, it has to take whether class or whether this particular h tag. You're able to relate, right? So h2 tag has within the CSS. Now previously we said okay, style tag we had on the head, but within the style tag again, if you're defining multiple, the order of priority here was at the last UI
Mm.
cursor. So it was
Mm.
taking the color red instead of white. Okay, so you can play around and see how the order of precedence etc are working. So always to keep it simple, let's not define too many ways. So we always follow one approach.
Class.
We'll use always class. So if you use tags, we use this one, or we use different approaches. It always messes up our how we have defined. So it just
Mm.
gives confusion to us. So for the case of simplicity, what we do is in UFA framework also, we'll not use ID selectors or we'll not use that star selector etc. We'll use only class selectors because we'll understand for each property. See, at one place I can use some custom names. So custom name, when I say, so I can simply say all fonts. If I am defining all fonts wherever I want to use, so I can say simply some name. So if I want to have a title font, so wherever I want to use title, I'll say dot title font, and this title font will give me understanding that okay, if I use class for in anywhere, if I encounter title, I have to use as title font in my tags. So this will be very simple and basic way of remembering as well. So if you give a name which you can relate, whenever you see a heading titles, you will give some specific font, so you can define all the properties, you know like font family etc, as um, so you can define some font family and font weight etc. So whenever you see this particular class, this particular will be affected. Similarly, if you want to go with for the specific blocks of code, so you can say uh, sub paragraph etc. So anything you want like quotation etc you're doing or something. So you can define for quotes. So whenever you're defining quotes, you can define some specific font etc, uh, color etc. So the background color etc you can define. So whenever quote comes, you can see some gray background and you can see some italic font. Okay, you can define your own different class files this way. So this is the simplest approach we have to implement. Those are the all available approaches. So likewise, always in HTML also, we'll use always external CSS, not inline or internal. Always we'll follow class properties and we'll follow only external CSS. So we wanted to always keep our code clean. So we'll have HTML and we'll have external CSS, and also we'll use only the um, class-based approach of defining the CSS. Clear? Okay. Just for example, so in this case for the paragraph tag, we have given ID as product ID, and to just understand how ID based works, so we have defined hash with hash if we define, and we gave some font family and color as turquoise, so this particular color. So if you see here, the tag which we use is access all practices with CSS. So this particular we have used ID. So basically any approach we can follow, but whichever approach we are following, we have to stick to that approach. Clear?
Mhm.
I think this is all about CSS. There is more to it. So now it looks like this is all cosmetic, but real difference I'll just show you now with one more example. So this was just basic understanding. Now if you understood, we'll see some simple calculator application and how we are going to do it. Okay. Okay. So within within this, one, If you see this, this is just a non-functional. So we have seen so far basic tags. But how do we build CSS kind of? So if you see HTML, etc., HTML has button tags. We have, various textiles. But nowhere we could visualize that HTML and CSS can bring out this kind of shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for
Yeah.
your looking, your point of view was always, is it always the web pages which we design? Not exactly. So it's how we use the tools. It all makes a sense. Now it's completely a contrast to what we were discussing so far. Now we do not have any paragraph tags. We do not have any title tags. All we have is buttons, and we have a application which is calculator. If you see here, how it appear in this layout as such.
Mm.
So let's understand how this is.
See,
Yeah. So you have any idea? So what are your thoughts? Like how you can achieve this particular thing?
to make it actually do the function of calculator.
Yeah, this design, how you got it? Like, see, now I'm saying like same tags what we learned, it came. We have presented the same tags so far. What we use the same things, HTML and CSS using it. It got this look.
Wow. No idea.
uh, let's
I mean, this is like the first time I even see that we can do this.
see. Idea always every day. What we are trying to say is whatever we are learning, we should be able to put to use. If not, it
Mm,
should not be theory. Theory, I'll reduce it drastically also, because now we have to understand in and out of what we are doing. But our motto is we have to use our skills to do. Even now, basic HTML says you should be able to design your own. You can just register one WordPress blog. You have to create your own every day. Your whatever you're learning, etc. GitHub, you put it, you write 1 or 2 lines. This is what I have done. That motivates you to that. Okay, I'm using this particular skill in at one or the other place. Every skill we have to use it at one or the other place.
mm,
So that way, if you are learning it, we will feel happy. Okay, I'm using whatever I'm learning. Okay.
right.
So let me show you quickly. So if you see, I used, let me minimize this. So this is a file where if you see, there is a basic head tag and the body tag. So this is the only code I have. All I defined is everywhere buttons.
Oh, the button type.
Yes,
Button,
there's a
yeah.
tag as a button. So we have HTML tag as button. Only I used buttons, nothing more. And we have
Yeah.
some input tag for giving value. So if you want to enter any value. So what we did is, so we use div tags. So I use just 2 div tags. So div tag one, it says that calculator. So the calculator outlook you have, right? So this whole calculator outline, I used div tags are meant for positioning it. The how you want to effectively use the space. This allows you to have, so instead of placing it one place other place, you can positioning it using div tags. So it's like organizing the controls. So I have used one major tag as div, and in that I added one input tag. If I'll show you step by step, it, you can relate it.
I did not know that button, that I thought that would be the one that got us all that, but when you click on it, right, there is a depth perception that it gives, right?
Correct.
I wasn't sure that the button would be able to do that, but looks like it is.
I'll just remove the CSS part and you'll understand the importance of CSS now. Okay. So I'm just and the head part we define the CSS, right? So I just
Mhm.
I'm parking it for the moment, and I'm just saving this, and let's see how this looks. So the same folder, I think I should start putting some shortcut. See, this is your
Oh.
HTML. See, all the difference we has done by who has done the major work here.
CSS.
Exactly. So we are trying to understand what difference CSS makes. So initially your person who, "Arey, why do we have to learn the
Right.
CSS?" So
Yeah.
it's basic. So your HTML code is this much. If you give it this way, nobody likes it.
Yeah. That's why I didn't even want to attempt saying it could be button because this is what I thought is gonna come out.
Right.
Mm.
So basic code, there is nothing code here. there are like just two codes here. One code is input where I disable for the time being. If I make it enable, so see there's a one input tag, and I have placed just a series of buttons. All are button tags. Just one more, just two divs I have made, and input and buttons, all buttons. I gave buttons some instead of text I have given as some plus minus etc.
Mm.
Values I have given, and numbers I have defined instead of text. See here, instead of text, all are buttons. There is nothing more here. There's
Yeah.
one input tag and there are like bunch of button tags. And
And just not like, I mean, not even in order, right?
yeah, see, this is because to replicate this particular order, I we have to use this is what logic comes into picture. So
Mm.
calculator buttons, how you have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, right?
Descending, uh-huh.
Okay, so we are used to this particular, so even QWERTY keyboard etc, we are used to those layouts. Okay, it's not that
Ah,
you can
yes, yes,
keep it
yes, yes, yes.
anyway, but we are by default when you see calculator, this is how the layout looks. So if you put in any order, user will be struggling to find the numbers. Okay, so it's important to understand in which order to place. Okay, so this all those, that's the logic. So it's the same button, but in which order we have to place it, we need to understand. So I have
Right,
to use this 7 8 9, then 4 5 6 1 2 3.
right, right, right.
Okay, so that's the only part which we used our brain, but the rest of the things are basic tube tags. So let's see how we are going to gradually build this particular layout. So I'll just add in this case simple style tag. Okay, so I have defined class properties. If you see, I have defined one class property for calculator, and I have defined one more class property for this input calculator screen. And for the keys, so whatever we are calling it as the keys, all the keys I'm calling as one name keys, and whole both of them together I'm calling as calculator. And this input box I'm calling it as calculator screen. So these are basically, this is first row is my screen, the second row is my keys. Only three classes for naming convention I'm following to make it very clean. Okay, so there
Mhm.
is no other CSS class. I think here I'm using for different colors to show. So we are using some color here, right? So for these buttons, to in order to have some color etc, what I am doing is I'm using classes, decimal, all clear and equal. So three more classes I'm using. So all I defined is class properties uh, to have different colors at various parts of the calculator. Okay, so let me add one by one. So let's add calculator screen first. So if you see here one by one CSS, what exactly we are adding. So here we have used this as well. We add calculator screen first. Understand that we have just input tag, and input tag you can we have value. So enabled and disabled. If you say enabled, now this field will become editable. So now I can enter anything value. Okay. Okay, now if you see 1 2 3 4, so we are able to enter now. Previously it was in disabled state. So first thing what we did is, for we have, in order to give we just added a black color. So if you look at the here, all we did is width we have set to 100%. So the input control, whatever space is there, 100%, that's why it was occupying the whole 100%, correct? So it occupied the whole 100%. And then the font size for the number which we are entering, so for that we are defining some font. For that I used some 5rem, and the height of this particular input box. So height, so this is a width part, this is a height part we have defined some in see in the here also we have different terminologies. We can define in percentages, we can define in pixels, we can define in rem. So these are like measurements of screen space. So the space on the see, for buttons they use different notations. So for each of them the space is measured differently. So on the screen here you can use pixels because it's a resolution. So 1024 by 800 etc. You say. So your wallpapers all comes in pixels. So those are that can be used for huge space, but for button we cannot use those resolutions, because button has very it occupies very small space. If you want to use some spacing or etc around it, so we have to use some smaller dimension. So that we use rem. You're able to relate, right? So kgs is meant for large quantities, and milligrams is meant for measuring small quantities. Similarly here also space, if you're using percentage is like for huge quantity. Like
Mm.
if I say it 100%, see it came with a huge space. But if I say pixels, it is relatively small term, and rem is relatively all the more smaller. So for the measuring space we use different notations. When to use what is depend on the control which we are using it.
Mm.
Getting right? So
Mm.
font size, it's like font if you see there is a text you cannot have measure in terms of percentage of pixel. You can measure in pixel, that's not a wrong. So we say 20 px etc, it will be for title etc. So you want very huge. So uh, pixel is one dot in image. If you see each dot represents one pixel, and 20 px if you say, it's like 20 dots. So that's how the measurement looks like. So percentage is meant for huge spaces, so large quantities, and rems are meant for small fonts etc, small things. And pixels are like relatively big. So in this case you can consider rem as your milligram, percent as your kilogram, and px as your grams, milligrams, kgs, what are pounds etc you want to consider, gallons etc
Mhm.
also, it is okay. So basic understanding, for huge spaces we refer percentage, and for relay to 1 megapixel etc are part of pixels, those are all pixels, px. Rem are like it's there's a I think there is a notation, like screen will be divided into 12 parts, and each 12 parts will have one square box as such. So there is some fundamental way how it is designed, but I'm not getting into it. But basically, this is the smallest unit is rem. Okay. So basically, I used width and height and then a font family. Then the border, in this case, I haven't given any border. Background color, I have set to black. So here, advantage with visual editor is if you want to change it directly, instead of searching for the hex code directly, you can set what are, uh, color you want. See, if you hover on top of it, any color you enter, then automatically it loads that color wheel. So if I save this, if you see, so it came with this color. So background color, and the text color. This was color we are referring to as background. This was text color. Color and background color difference is background. This is meant for text. So here you can go with if we are having, you can go with black as well, as long as you're having a dark background. So we can customize it that way. So further we are just trying. So alignment of the text. So if you see, we are calculate always starts from the extreme right, not from the left to right. Generally we write from the left to right, but calculator digits it will come from
Mm.
the right to left. So for that case, what I'm doing is text alignment I'm saying is right. So these all are CSS. Without CSS, we'll not be able to do these things. Okay. So from right, I'm setting it. So it start always whatever we're entering, it starts from right instead of from the left. So if you replace it to left, it almost it completely changes the way we use calculator. And again, this is not a expected behavior. We are
Mm.
always used to calculator means it has to come from the right to left. So that's how the perception, and we have to keep those things in mind when we are designing any application or anything also. So how users will be interacting with this particular thing, so that's where we define. And similarly, padding is a concept I'll just show you visually. So on the day one I did not introduce intentionally. So if you open this, so this is one cool pictorial image. This is very important when you're using any space. See, like how I said the percentage, pixels, etc. There is one more notation. So where you wanted to give that space, that empty white space you where are we using, right? So if you see here, there's a nice empty white space on the top and below the number, and there's this empty space on the left of this particular. Here if you see the small space around on the top, right?
Mm. Mm.
So there are like we are using minute spaces out there, and we have to instruct to the program that where the space should be. So they use relative words. So according to this area which we are referring to. So those terminologies are nothing but this. So if you see here, this is your control. The blue one which you're seeing 1264 by 5894. This is your water control. It could be button. It could be your input tag. Any control, HTML control. If you have it, just above it, if you are using it, just above it. So surrounding it, then we call it as padding. Okay. So in this case, our font is our 0 is our control. Okay. Surrounding it, whatever we have, that is called as padding. Getting right?
Got it.
And if you had to add some if you want to put some square box or something, so in this case you had some outside square kind of, right? So if you want to give some like frame, so some frame etc, you want to give, that we call it as border. So generally table controls etc will come with borders, or title etc you're putting. So empty space is different and the border is different. Border is visible. You'll have rounded borders, you have square borders etc. Just if you see here, the border here, the button has a border of it's not a square, it has rounded borders, right? So this is the border. Okay. And the space around it is called as padding. Okay. And this is about and there is one more. We have margin outside the border. If you're defining any space, that they call it as margin. You have the control. Surrounding the control, we call it as padding. And if you have a border like outline, then we call it as border. And outside the border, whatever space if you want to give, those they call it as margin. Okay. So the CSS terms are always relative. So whenever you prefix with that particular word, the particular rem or anything, it applies according to the standard of notation which we have defined. So in this case, padding, right? When I say the font right side of it, it is always adding some space. It's not touching to the extreme border. So it is always touching to the, it's having some space. And padding on the left. So on the left and right side, whenever I'm entering it, if enter completely, I think it is going to the extreme, right? I think that there is no control limit here. So we have to restrict also. So if it is going overflowing, so beyond the screen space, it should not overflow. If you want to set also, we can set the overflow limit. We can limit how much values we have to set. I think now there is no limit. So ideally, whenever we have any limit as such, so here you are seeing, right, always some space. So we are saying the padding on the left and right as some empty space, leave some space so that this text will be visible. If not, it will it will not be visible for as a user. So this is a basic way we use the CSS to achieve some color. So let's add one more area and let's understand. It's a basic tags how we are using in different scenarios we are trying to. And I'll just set font size for the whole idea, and then I'll just use. This is preparing the ground. Like for the whole HTML page, I'm just setting the font size as some percentage, and I'm giving one box. I'm putting one box over there, and we have now. If you see, this is where we are using all. So everywhere margin is 0. That means now we discussed margin is outside of your border and padding is next to the control. So here I'm trying to set this is operator is like before loading. So these two columns, if you're using it this way, for all selectors, whenever you're using all selector, for all selectors, before all selectors are set, use these particular parameters. I'll repeat again. See how you should probably, if you can see the output, it will give you much better visibility. If you see here, the margin etc are made as 0. So previously, if I remove it, So I have to sit here. The control here. Okay. There is no much difference we are able to notice. Okay. Because they are very minute. Let me check other way. Box. Let me remove border box as well. Am I referring to the same page? I removed it even. Okay, it's got saved. Saved. No, I think I'm modifying at the wrong place.
Yeah, I thought so.
Still, it has tags are here. It's not able to. Okay, I have opened the pages out here as well. So I think I'm removing it here. Okay, yes, I can just copy it here. Let me close this. So let me go back. I think opening too many tabs always it will be confusing as such. Uh,
Mm.
so what we I'm trying to say is how the margin now the so concept which margin padding etc which we are discussing how we are actually using this. So in this case, in the W3s itself, there are like different properties. How HTML tags we have CSS, there are lots of properties. So if specifically to how we have selectors etc. Similarly, they have this margin class etc. So various ways whenever we are using it, how it has to behave. So whenever we are using star as such, so in this case, I said like star means whenever any control for all the controls it will apply. So in this case, whenever we have any control, so in this case we have button tag. So whenever button tag is loading, if we want to add some border to it, and for every object which we are using, we want to add some border to it. So then we can define there directly with star. So and along with site, if you want to set some font size, so before adding a border, if you wanted to give some you know some other action if you wanted to perform, so then star colon before will do before setting the star property what are our css style etc has to be applied that will do. So we have something called before and after. So here somewhere it will be there. Status is on the numbers. So here you'll they'll give this is very neatly explained, so simple things they'll use and then they'll explain this as well. I think in selectors itself it will be there. So now I am using different terminal sites. So where you have to find so that you need to understand. See, I'm demonstrating it is okay, but you need to learn right as well. So where to find these tags, etc. So I'm trying to show you that. So see here, show more. Okay, few selectors are here. I think somewhere else. So lots of things we can do. So these all are like various ways of using CSS, etc. Couldn't think. Maybe here it's not there. So the margins, etc., exclusive examples, etc. Also, I think this also will be useful to understand which all ways you can use. So here, basics skeleton wise still explain. So margin classes, padding classes, you can refer to these examples and versus border. Then you can open the any page and just try to understand with this example, this snapshot. This always will be handy. So because if we understand when to use margin, when to use padding, etc., we can design very effectively the space. So space always is. So just understand the difference between border this one, and I couldn't find this. So probably I'll just share it later.
Mm.
So I'll just share the. Actually, what I wanted to show you is how exactly that all selectors before etc. are working as such. Okay. So this before tag for this star will do for every control it will set the margin as 0 and padding as 0. and it will give the box sizing as inherit. When we say inherit, for the HTML parent, I have given some border box. So it will always take a box. So all the controls which you see will have some box. Okay. Just to post this, I save. Just notice the difference before and after. So there is white space around it, and there is no black line. If you see anything, there is no black line, etc. For below buttons, there is all white empty space, and for this as well. When we add this particular font size and box as some box we are adding, and just we are setting all those spaces to 0, because we wanted to physically add, gradually add one of the other borders, etc. So how we are going to do, we'll see. So I just set that to 0. So all the margins, etc. we have set to 0. Now let's move on to our screen. So we had this one, right? So for the calculator, we'll just add now. So we had a screen and keys are still there, so same way. For the calculator, what I'll do is now I have to set it to center. So we have it somewhere huge space it is occupying, right? So what we'll do is now we'll just we'll add a border, and then we are setting to some position to absolute. So here positioning also we have absolute and relative, and like I said, um, this whole is measured as x and y axis. So this top corner is 0 0, and then where exactly we want to place it. So we want to place it on the center. So I'm just, what I'm trying to do is I'm just bringing this particular whole calculator CS in the class property I have set to make it, appear at the center. So what we give is position as absolute. Absolute means if it is whichever the screen space we have it, always it refers to from top 50% and from left some 40%. So here absolute top 50%, left 50% means from top exactly it is, see if this is 0 0, from the top 50% half midway it will come, and from the left it will come 50% midway. So it is exactly at the center, 50% from the top and 50% from the left. So if I tweak around with these values, if you want to position it something relative to the left, just see the changes how it takes place. So it is coming to the left. So from the left, how much ever far we want to push it up, we can increase the value accordingly, and we can relatively change the position. So all the tags, now in the Wikipedia example you had on the leftmost, right? So using relative or absolute, you can position and place those tags, etc. And you can permanently fix using this class operator. So in the class operator, we are defining it where exactly this whole piece of code has to appear. Getting right? So for now, I'm just making this center, and then it comes to center. Here we have just given some border and border some color. Now so now in previously we removed the border. Now if you notice, now we got the border. You see light gray color kind of border. So there was no border previously. So that activity we have done just before. So what we said is keep the margin 0 by adding 0 and everything as 0. Then now we started adding according to the area we wanted to use. So we had given that border radius is 1px and this particular color. You can change it to some black, etc. And then you can visualize it. So you got some border around it. Okay. This is about so relative is like absolute is always it is fixed. Relative is if you zoom in, zoom out, etc. Always based on available space, it will automatically calculate the center. So if you relative use, if you zoom it, it automatically comes to this particular center. Okay. So relative and absolute are like fixed and uh, according to the available space. Whenever you zoom in, zoom out, the absolute will have always the same 0 will be always calculate from this end. And whereas you have relative, now currently this will be considered 0 0. In case of absolute, this part topmost area will be considered 0 0. So x and y axis starts accordingly. Okay. So just few concepts as such. So let's add, now we added to calculator, we have added to screen as well. Let's add some two keys now. Okay, so I think use keys. For the keys, major part what we need is we need some table kind of structure. So for that we have some standard layouts. So we have what we are currently using is grid layout. So we want to place all the buttons in a grid. So it will be like we have to say how many columns are required for that grid. So in this case, I'm saying I'm even for the grid there is use this particular FR as the dimension. So four columns grid I want have it, and each will have a space of one FR. So all I did is display as grid, and then columns when I'm defining it. Just you see now you got a 4 by 4 layout. So display as grid, when we say it comes in 4 by 4 layout, and to add space to left and right and top and bottom, etc., what we are doing is we are adding padding. So grid gap, so between cells, the gap I'm saying is 20 px, and the padding, like I said, surrounding to that particular button, I'm adding as 20 px. Now all we were specifying is assign it in a display in a 4 by 4 grid, and then provide some empty space between the columns, and the padding is surrounding the button some white space. So that's the reason you got this particular space. If you remove any of these properties, then the look would be different.
Mm.
Changing at the wrong place, and I'm just trying all this. Okay, so if we change this, let's see how it looks. See, if you see, there is no space around it. Okay, only the separations, the columns wherever we use that came. If I remove this padding as well, I think it's understand individually. So if you see now for the between the cells, whatever we had it, so I removed the grid gap. Okay, so then all got attached to each other. So
Mm.
that's how the difference of margin and padding you'll understand. So if you look more closely with each example of border, etc., in W3, you'll understand when to use what. Okay, so that visualization you'll get it only when you know see a specific thing. So in this case, what we are trying to do is uh, for the button, surrounding the button, we are giving some space, and for all the four grids adjacent to them, to add some space, we are using grid gap. When we have these two together, it appears in this way. Clear? So still we did not get the desired layout. If you see,
Mm. Yeah.
there is a huge gap out there. So how it evolves is we use now buttons. We are coming back to the button. So each button we wanted to define some, the flashing part you did not expect. No, that was hover. Okay. Whenever
Mm.
you are placing the cursor, we are giving some color to it. That's the reason you're getting. I'll you show along with it. So here now for the button, we are trying to do the CSS part. So button, let's see the output. Then probably you can relate. So this is how plain simple HTML button looks. Now see, you got the your
Mm.
fancy look of it.
Yeah. Yep.
Now it came almost close,
Closer. Yeah.
the reality. So all of us, each element, when you give nice CSS, it changes the whole look. So here we have set button to some color, and here on hovering it is coming, right. This is because of hover. So on hovering, whatever color we wanted. So here I am just saying on hover this particular color. So if I set to some, yeah, this way. So this is how it appears.
Mm.
Okay. It's all the shade we follow. that gives the, so in this case, uh, closer to gray kind of, if you give, it gives you the factor of clicking it. It's like buttons. If not, it'd be a just boring button. So whether you clicked it or not, you need to understand, right? So that hover helps you understand whether you have clicked that or not. So you need the sound as well as the animation, then only you can correlate that you have done some action. So that is a perception.
Right.
Okay, fine. So here, how what we use is same. We had used some height to the button height. We are defining it, and we are defining the background color. And we wanted to have some rounded buttons instead of regular buttons. So we have given border and border radius. Border radius will allow you to give this. Uh, the border has edge. If you see, it has slight curves around it, right? So that is because of the border radius. So we wanted to have some rounded edges. So to have rounded edges, what we have done is we have given border radius. And similarly, the font size, and then for the text, what color we need to have. And if you want to add some gradient, so in this case, we had some background gradient. If you see, this is not particularly white button. It has, I mean, it may not be noticeable much. Uh, it has light gray shade, default
Right.
button. It's,
Yeah.
so that is little shade, okay, gray shade, and some box shadow, etc., text shadow. See, these are like optional properties. These are not essentially necessary. They will not give you much significant difference also. But what we are trying to do is we're setting some standard CSS properties. So to have a shadow effect, to have an gradient effect, etc., we has these particular properties called linear gradient, and these as text shadow, etc. properties. So if you use some different animation kind of inbuilt CSS properties, so then you can give some this cool look and feel. So apart from this, just I was adding some more colors to button. So all clear, I'm using some button color, and then hover effect, equal sign. So these all are basic things. And I think equal sign also should, I think this part I'll just explain. Calculate keys, everything are there. Just other buttons, clear and equal button are there, right? So I'm just adding some color, nothing much here. So equal sign, all clear, and we have, right? So these buttons, equal sign, and this particular buttons. So we are just giving some color to these buttons.
Mm.
Okay. So we wanted to have it. So here as well, if you see the plus, minus, etc. are on the top. Okay, and even this buttons are not in the order which we want. If you see here, how we have the positioning it. So you have on the top all the operators, and
Mm.
this is how you generally have your calculator. So zero and clearing, you'll clear it, and output you have it here. Okay, so to have this effect, what we are doing is we are just creating one more. Okay, this is an operator where it has to start and where it has to end. Okay, this particular thing will do the difference. We add, if I missed any one small thing, I think all we added from the top to bottom. Just I'm replacing again. Final property what we are using is equal sign here. I have set grid row start and row end. Okay, these are like the column. What are the within the grid? See, if you want to repositioning it, so which is the starting one, which is the ending one, etc. For that, there are like some parameters. So so row start at 2 and row end at 6. Okay, and column start at 4 and column start at 5. So these are like for meant for where we are giving this particular option, where we wanted to position this particular fields, etc. So equal sign, if you see, equal sign class I have defined here. Okay, this equal to button, the button which we are seeing currently, it is at the this leftmost place, right? So what I'm
Mm.
trying to say is, I'm saying where in the grid it has to start. Okay, I'm defining some start and end position to it. So this is always here it goes with this is row 0. Okay, 0 1 2 3 4. Okay, and you have this is again column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. Okay, it has to
Mm.
go to column 4, and where it has to start is I wanted to start it at the second row. Okay, if you see at the second row from here to here bottom, I wanted to give it a complete stretch as a huge button. So from where it has to start and where it has to end, start and end position we are saying. Say this button now it is occupying default space. What we are trying to do is instead of at the last position, we want this control to start from this particular row to column 4. This is column 4, right? This is row 2,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
row to column 4, it starts and it ends at last column.
Oh.
So it is column 4 of last row.
Mm. Four of.
Understood? Okay. So we are saying within this grid 4 by 4 layout, where this control has to start and where it has to end. So we are just, if you see, it started at row 2, column 4, and ended at row 4, column 4. Correct?
Yes.
So to define such condition, how we are defining is this way. So row start, row end, and then grid column start and end. So it is
Mm.
ending with 4 and ending with such. So this is how the commands we are giving. So basically what you're saying is if you look at here, you'll not understand. But if you look at the screen, you'll understand related. So we are just saying when to start, when to end. Which row is starting, which is row is ending. Row starting is 2, row ending is 6. Column starting is 4, column ending is 5. So etc. We define the layout. Okay. I think you can play around with. So so when we so now if I redefine it, it comes with whenever you're positioning it this, all other buttons also will be adjusted because from here you removed it. So these all are got a uniform space they got. All we did is for the equal sign we have brought it here. This came with a calculator layout. That's it. You can practice this. I'll just put these snippets there. So here all we used is you have to understand the same tags what we used. Okay.
Right.
So this gives you best example of how CSS effectively can be used. And after JavaScript, we'll give more muscle power to it. Now this doesn't work. This is just a dummy calculator.
Yeah.
Now our objective is on you have to do your sum, addition, etc. using JavaScript. So that we'll learn tomorrow. Okay.
Mm.
So then we'll understand.